Welcome back to the Coffin Lounge podcast. I'm your host, VampireKitten, and today I have Michelle Belanger with me, who is an author, television personality, and occult expert. Hi, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Hanging in there in gray and dreary Ohio.
Right? How's the weather been? Just
There is no snow yet. It's just wet.
It's so weird. We had like a little bit of a dusting. I'm in Kansas City, and
Mm.
we had my dog had one good snow day, and then it was like, oh, now it's smush. So I don't know where the snow is.
Not here.
Yes, I'm a little lost. So let's kind of dig in a little bit about how you got started, because I feel like
Mm.
we always talk about, like, everybody always talks about like what you're currently doing. I want to
Yeah.
know where this all began.
Oof. I mean, I've told like my first psychic experiences a billion freaking times at this point, but like, how did I get into this as like a career is a journey by itself. There's sort of two tracks to that. Um, the first thing goes back to 1996 and actually has to do with the vampire community. I was pleasantly on my way to becoming a college professor and have a very, very different life and be very much in the closet about a lot of the stuff that I did. And 1996 saw vampire murders, the disappearance of a journalist, and a lot of like really high profile stuff that during the height of the satanic panic meant that the communities that I loved and was a fundamental part of were all under fire. And at that time, the folks who would come forward and talk on the talk shows or do interviews for newspapers and whatnot were, well, they weren't good. Like, they were usually, so frequently it was sensationalistic, or they were really obviously people who were not part of our communities, who were going on there in order to like really stir up negative opinion. And the downside is at that time, if you were going to work with the media at all, you had to use your legal first and last name. Like, there was no covering up your identity. Like if you were going to be quoted, you needed to be a real person. And I had already cut ties with my family. Like, I wasn't planning on having kids. Like, I knew people who weren't coming forward because they didn't want to lose their jobs. They didn't want to have the kids taken away. They didn't want it to like really impact themselves. And I'd already like burned all of those bridges. That was a whole other thing. And so I was like, well, I guess it's going to be me. And part of that was because the Ricky Lake show was doing a thing on the vampire community.
Yep.
And I had been working with this Texas journalist, Jeff Gwynn, for his book, Something in the Blood. I ran the International Society of Vampires. I had a newsletter called The Midnight Sun. I had a magazine called Shadow Dance. Had a fairly big footprint in these spaces. And the Ricky Lake show called, and they were like, would you want to be on as a vampire? And at the time, I'm like, I'm a researcher. I will not go on camera because I'm like, I'm not going to get tenure if I'm out as a vampire. I'm not going to get tenure if I'm out as any of this stuff. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
But then they were like, well, would you like an all expenses paid trip to New York City to come on and be a vampire? And I was like, no. Do you have any friends who would like an all expenses paid trip to New York City? And I was like, oh, I see how this goes now. I really see how this goes. I understand. So, of course, the answer was no, right across the board. And if you ever dig up that episode, it shows.
I'm pretty sure I've seen it, and it's
It shows who
it,
they got and why they got them. And it was eye-opening for a couple of levels. And from that point forward, I reached out to stuff like that. And like, when there was controversy, when there was an interview, I was like, okay, so this is me and this is what I do, and let's have a reasonable discussion. And no, in fact, I don't sleep in a coffin unless we're talking about that one time when I was in Oliver in high school and a coffin was a prop.
I think it's really interesting because the media back then, because I
Mm.
remember a lot of that. Back then, the media sensationalized so much because that's what got the views, right? Nowadays, it's so much more open and it's easier to
Yeah.
be like a relatively normal person and go, hey, I am this in this world, but I'm, functioning on in society as a regular person for the most part. So, like, at the end of the day, like, we're all just regular people just trying to survive on this planet. But it's really interesting for the media to go, oh, hey, you look spooky, let's go.
Oh yeah, no, it was especially back then. It's
Hmm.
funny now because like these days, tarot card and witch influencers and like everything it's a very very different landscape. Even as like the dominant culture is sort of like spinning precariously back towards satanic panic land.
Right. Actually, that's a good point. Like witch talk, while I don't agree with a lot of it, it is
Mm,
very interesting that now something that would have happened 10 years ago would have never been a thing.
no,
Like
no, and
ever.
well, like just the profusion of tarot decks. Like
Hmm.
tarot is now cool and trendy. I believe that uh, sorry, major fashion houses used it as an inspiration for runway things. Like
Right.
it's the whole like spooky is in. When I've worked with Joseph Vargo of Monolith Graphics since 1995, and when they came out with when they came out with the Gothic Tarot originally, they could not find a printer for their tarot deck because printer after printer refused to touch a tarot deck on the grounds that it was satanic and it would possess their printing press.
Oh boy, times have changed. I actually remember I vividly like I have visions of that art.
Mhm.
That art was mind blowing.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
it's like mind blowing is seeing his art in person because his brush style is so tiny and precise
oh
that over at his house in his little private gallery, I was like, oh, these are prints. Where are the originals? Those are the originals, and I'm like, holy
oh that's amazing.
damn, man.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, did you hear about the I know this is total sidebar. Did you hear about
sidebar's good.
the lady who owns a pagan like a metaphysical store in Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
yes,
who's
where they
getting
tried to do the laws,
they're trying to
like
arrest her for fortune
Mhm,
telling. Like and she's
mhm.
trying to change the laws and I'm just like, "Wow, you're like a superhero. Like you are really fighting this." And it's like the chief of police who is
Yeah,
like
no,
trying
and
to arrest her. It's just I have no words. Like we're in the 21st century. There's like laws. There's like stupid laws all over the place. Like you can't own camels on a Sunday afternoon. You know what I mean? Like that is such a stupid law. Like why are we still why you know what I mean? Like the
yeah, well,
dumb
and they never
laws.
take them off the books, but they
No.
will reserve the right to enforce them if it's convenient.
Right.
The thing that has changed is 20, 30 years ago, that happened all the time. Like those laws are on the books in lots of places. Shops wouldn't be able to get opened up. People would get run out of town. I live in a small town in Ohio. Like it has a gazebo on the town square. Like it's all like if you see like classic little small Midwestern town on any TV show, that is what our town looks like. Um, they do art in the park and an ice sculpture thing in February, and like just it's like Ray Bradbury just sort of like exploded in Ohio here. And 30 years ago, a metaphysical shop tried to go in, and like they were harassed, they were vandalized, like the whole town just did its best. Well, first of all, they tried to zone them out, and they weren't allowed to like be in town. And but now there are I've lost count of how many metaphysical, occult, and witchcraft, and like obviously, like we just had like Black Cat Books, which is a spooky book and curiosity shop. Like it's just everywhere,
I love that.
and those laws are still there. There are definitely still people like 15 years ago when I did a book tour and like I did like a little book release at the library here. The local Baptists picketed me and like wrote in a whole bunch of things to the newspaper because I am corrupting the children of wherever by existing and talking about ghosts.
Yeah.
And that sea change that has happened, and again, as much as like witch talk and the sort of social media witch influencers and
It still goes back to Ricky Lake, the sensationalism. So the most sensational ones are getting the most views.
yeah,
We're still having that problem, but it's more open.
but it also pushes
Yeah.
a level of, it makes it trendy, it makes it more acceptable. Like there's an argument for like it makes it kind of bubblegummy, that it takes its teeth out, but at the same time, by making it trendy, it makes it less scary. It makes it, well, okay, we live in late state capitalism. The real thing is, as long as you can prove that people are willing to buy it, it will be accepted because clearly that's a viable shop.
Right.
like that's when we were like deep underground and I don't know. But so I got started because of this cultural milieu. Like that's really where it all started. I started deep in underground presses, ISV, Shadow Dance, Midnight Sun, all of those things were zines. Like the zine culture that grew out of the 70s punk and the goth punk and all of that point where technically we had freedom of speech, but publishing companies and magazines wouldn't print your stuff if you were too out there.
Right.
So queer content would get passed over and anarchist content would get passed over if you were goth, if you were punk, if you were a cult, if you were too weird, if you were too anything, they just wouldn't touch it. So you did your own stuff.
Right.
That's where I started.
That's awesome. That is, I'm glad that there are people like you that exist on this planet, because we wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for the innovators in those realms and the early metaphysical, just people going, hey, paranormal, hey, metaphysical, hey, occult, because it was just, what do we have back then? Nothing. We had the Satanic Bible, ish, kind of.
Maybe Fate magazine.
There wasn't
a couple
really
of like new agey things, like the Sedona Journal. Like I worked at a bookstore in the middle '90s, so you had like that stuff that the really like kind of
Gothic
white
Beauty
lighty
finally got out there a little bit around that time, and then like once we got like Hot Topic, I think things changed a lot. Which did you know that Hot Topic was not always an alternative store? I saw pictures of it a couple of weeks ago on the internet. Apparently the alternative stuff did so well that they just completely switched gears. So
that makes sense.
Very cool. So speaking of the kind of bookstores and the metaphysics and everything, you've been writing forever. When was your first book?
What was my first book?
Yeah.
Oh, that gets into some weird spaces because back in the like early 90s, it wasn't a real book if it was published through an underground press or if it was published by yourself. So really the first book that's been published in multiple forms has been the Vampire Codex, which is most recognizable as the Psychic Vampire Codex.
I was very excited when that released. I love that book. It's very good.
Let's see, I wrote it in I've got it right here because I was this is the very first handwritten version from '94.
Wow.
So
nice that's pretty.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
And at that point, I definitely hit up publishers, and I learned the hard way that was not going to fly back then. So its first versions were zines. Its very first release was released as in a serialized version in chapbooks. There was like a full-size 8.5 by 11 spiral-bound version that got kicked around, run off at like Copymax and Kinko's, and then there was let's see, a version that was published from a publishing house, another underground publishing house in New York City. And finally, as basically its 10th anniversary edition in 2004, I got Wiser, which was like Red Wheel, Canary Press. Like they've kind of become this conglomerate of things. Like
yeah,
publishing is really a whole thing right now. Like it's a whole thing. But they picked it up in 2004, and there were a couple of things I had to change. I had to take out. We were still on the tail end of the Satanic Panic, so anything that was too dark or could be interpreted as too dark, and vampires were right on the edge of that.
right.
But like I had a section that's really explicit in the original versions on how to do psychic attacks on the grounds that if you understand how it works, then you can protect yourself against it. But that had to go. And some other things about energy healing that they were worried would like get them sued by the medical establishment, and that it was somehow like suggesting that you should do this rather than seek medical attention.
Right.
And I'm like, nowhere did I say that. And they're like, well, yeah, but people. And I'm like, fine. But so that one is really the first big one.
Okay. So then I want to talk about the Psychic Energy Codex. When did that one happen versus when the Vampire Codex was released? When did that come about?
So the Energy Codex is the prequel to the Vampire Codex. What happened with the Psychic Vampire Codex is it came out and it teaches a style of energy work that is my homegrown version, the stuff that I'd been doing pretty much all my life. And there were a lot of energy workers and witches and other practitioners who the feedback I got were like, hey, this is a great book. We really like the Vampire Codex. We like this technique and this technique, but the whole vampire thing isn't quite our thing. Like that doesn't speak to us. Could you do a book that is more about just the energy work in general?
Right.
So I was like, all right, that sounds good. And also, how about I make it, this is a book that if your mom or like your grandma or whatever asks you like, what is it that you're practicing, you can hand them this book and they'll understand it and they'll find it accessible.
Right.
So that's where the Energy Codex came from. Now, originally when I pitched the Vampire Codex to Wiser, what I had asked for was to be able to do a series.
Mm-hmm.
The Vampire Codex initially, if you're familiar with the book, it's called a codex because of the way it's broken up into like these tiny little bite-sized chapters. And they're not even chapters, they're usually like a page and a half, like just tiny little topics. And the idea was each subsequent book after that would take a topic that is introduced in the Vampire Codex and then do a full book on it, which is also where we get psychic dreamwalking. Although Wiser wanted to do that as a separate book and pull all the vampire stuff out of it again. So,
right. Okay. So you now have re-released the Psychic Energy Codex.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those are available on your website, which I'll link in the description. I want to talk a little bit about Lonely House. What is Midnight Kiss? I want to kind of go in a little bit because that's your newest release is Lonely House, yeah?
Yeah. Well, so I've been doing nonfiction for 20 years now, I guess. Yeah, 20 years. And I think the pinnacle of that for me is the Dictionary of Demons, where I really got to use my actual degree and like the way I love to do research. But I have always been a gamer also.
Right.
And in the 90s, one of the things that was sort of unfortunate was because of the way the Satanic Panic was, and they went after D&D, and one of the ways that they would undercut all of that and attack it was like, people will get confused and they will think that they are actual sorcerers, and like just the whole like magic and D&D is a gateway drug to Satanism. To be a role player at that time and also to be a serious occultist got into some like places that were controversial both for people outside of our community and for people inside of our community because we would get so much heat.
Right.
It never stopped me, but I did make a clear break. When I published the Codex through Wiser, I made a decision to stop running Vampire the Masquerade LARPs for Origins and Gen Con and Wizards of the Coast, because I didn't want people to assume that like this person, that there was crisscross, as opposed to here's the real stuff I do. Also, I like vampires and it's fun to tell stories. Like these things don't have to.
I remember a lot of that crossover and people making those connections, and I think that was it felt like more of a message board connections thing, but then like if they were making it in our own community, you knew it was going to be out there in like the greater community. I think it's interesting now because like I'm doing this show, right? And the show is a very serious show, but I'm also a gamer and I also do other things that I'm involved in other realms, and I think separating the two by giving it its own name versus what I do is probably the most helpful. But at this point, I'm kind of like, I do all of these things. So you're just going to have to deal with the fact that this is a serious thing and this is a not so serious thing. I don't write games, but I think that there is some like, hey, I role play on this silly server versus, hey, this is actually a serious conversation that we're having.
And the people suggesting that there isn't a line there, those are people who are going to create hoops for us to jump through in order to try to be the acceptable weirdos.
Right.
And we will never be. Like it's just more ways to suck the joy out of our lives. And after trying to cater to that for a while, I was like, you know what? Just, nope, I don't care. So when everything happened with COVID, I needed a little bit more joy in my life. Like I looked for things that had really fed me creatively. I write fiction also, but like I really missed. There's something magical about creating an immersive reality and like characters, and then watching them come to life in the hands of the players.
I feel that on an emotional level.
Yeah, and there's that. Like the collaborative quality of it. Like I've never felt more creatively alive than when I put together this framework, this sort of like vessel of possibility, and then handed it off and held space for people to do amazing things with their characters and like plot moments, and like there's kind of like high emotion moments in role play where like tears are streaming down your face because you're so into that, and then you step back and you're like, oh wow, that catharsis was amazing.
Right.
So that is where I love to live with role play. And role playing has changed a lot and has become a lot more accessible. A lot of us older gamers sitting around a table isn't always very feasible, and especially during lockdown it was not at all. But we have this lovely thing called the internet.
Yay.
And streaming has become like simple, like stuff that we struggled to try to like even have the bandwidth for 10 years ago. Now is just everybody does it. We do video calls. Nobody thinks twice about it. So why not take advantage of that? Take advantage of the fact that you don't have to sell your third-born child in order to get a print run of an indie published, gaming book, because those are always super expensive. I've got friends who went bankrupt for it. You can just do it in a digital version.
Right.
So that is what I started to do. Also, solo games and journaling games and games that cross and blend genres so that it's sort of you're reading a story, but you're also writing things, which is where Lonely House comes from. My first journaling game was Midnight's Kiss, which is, I just leaned into everything about the vampire genre that everybody loves. Just vampire lovers, vampire romance, kinky, queer, weird, whatever shape you want it to be. And it is just indulgent to the genre.
Can you explain how these books work? So say I bought a PDF and they are RPGs. How would I play that? Just like a little.
So a solo journaling RPG means that you don't need a group, and you can just do this on your own time. You either download the PDF or you get a physical copy of it, and you engage with it in the same way that you would with journaling prompts. There's immersive text to pull you into the story. And then there's key moments where there are decisions. There's a branching narrative. It's sort of an analog version of some of the stuff that we'll get with role-playing computer games.
Right.
Sometimes it's reliant on a randomizing element. I usually integrate the option to choose rather than just roll the dice, because sometimes you roll the dice and you're just like, but that wasn't the outcome I was hoping for.
Right.
So with Midnight's Kiss, it's a little more standard of a journaling game where you create your perfect vision of what a vampire lover is. What do they look like? What do they like to do in the bedroom? Where do they come from? How old are they? What's some of their cultural influences? What are their personality quirks? And you create this iconic person that you will stumble across as the protagonist of the tale. And then you go through chapters where it's the steps of the romance, the first meeting, the, oh, I think maybe they have a secret. And all of those little beats that are the heart and soul of every good vampire romance novel. And at the key points in each of those chapters, there are questions that are prompts for what do you do in this situation? Where do you, like, if you go on this date, what does that look like?
Right.
And you can write as much or as little as you want to. So if you're somebody who's been into text role play, and you do like stuff back and forth, this is just a format where it's set up for you to like immerse yourself in that at your own speed.
That's incredible. I grew up with text-based role play, and I was in AOL chat rooms and little tappings way back in the day, IRC, early role play. But yeah, that I loved text-based role play like as a kid, mostly because I felt that it helped me learn how to write a lot more and express myself through words.
Well, that's one of the appeals for me, is like it is the intersection of role play, of creativity, of theater, of writing, of introspective journaling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a happy place where like I love to live in the shape of this, and then again create that container and just be like, what do you do with it? What do you do with it? Like, just let it go fly in the world and be open-ended and give it enough freedom that it can take whatever shape a person needs.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty great. There's just something about, just going back to role playing in general, there's just something about RPing with like other people and improving with them that just, I don't know, it just, there's excitement there that you can't get from reading a book or playing a video game that's on rails.
Oh, like an immediacy of it, the flexibility. If you've ever LARPed, like live action role play, like in person with a group of people, like there's this fascinating thing that will happen where the story comes alive, and stuff just starts to gel in a certain way. Like people, the right person will just walk through the door at the moment that like they need to be in the story. Like the story becomes a living, breathing thing, and you are aware that you are a part of this magic that is unfolding. You see a little of it sometimes with the actual plays where people are like, this has to be scripted. The dice couldn't have done that. But if you've ever been a gamer, the dice absolutely do that. Like whatever dice, whatever random thing that you're using to create the sort of like mechanical structure for your game, if the story is alive, it just starts to work the way it's supposed to work. And you get these like incredible moments of that shouldn't possibly have happened, but the dice roll totally says, yes, it did.
And it was a perfect little moment.
Yeah, no, it's, and I do also view it. I also think that this is one reason why it was so threatening back in the day. That is magic. It's like, it gives you a training ground for learning how we weave reality with our dreams, with our stories, with force of personality. And because it's play, we give ourselves permission to do things that we would never, ever push that hard to try to accomplish. It's
Right.
within a little, it's this happy little microcosm where you can kind of test the limits of a vicarious reality and then realize that, well, why can't you make that dice roll exactly the way that you need it to in the real world too?
Exactly.
What does that magic feel like?
It blurs the lines a little bit, and I get the scare behind it, but also if you're rooted in reality for the most part, as most people are, I don't think that it's difficult to separate the two.
No, I what I mean by the real root of the fear is that stories are power,
Oh
and
yeah.
stories are magic, and to let us really seize that magic and understand that to some extent every part of your life is a story. Like, what story do you want to tell? You have more power about that than anyone ever wants you to believe.
That is very true. Those are some very good points that I actually hadn't even thought about that before. So, Lonely House when did that release?
There was a digital release last year, right around Halloween, and then I access. Huh?
I was gonna say, can we talk about your inspiration for Lonely House?
Well, there's a couple of things inspiring Lonely House, but so first you probably want to talk about the fact that I own a haunted Airbnb.
I do, absolutely, I do.
That came about for a couple of things. I was first looking for a place to run classes and do weekend retreats.
Right.
That wasn't my actual, like, the house that I also sleep in regularly, because I occupy that little niche celebrity space where I definitely have fans, but I'm also not someone who's going to have like security either. Right. So I wanted a space where I could do dream walking and other classes that would require people to sleep over at least once, do some of the interior work, and then like reconvene. Looked around for a location. I had my heart set on like a big Victorian with turrets and like the goth house. Like, if I couldn't find like an old church to renovate, because that would have been the best. We saw this house come on the market in Oberlin, Ohio, which is close enough to where we live, and is a very beautiful historic city. It's got an amazing college. I actually almost went to the college there. It's got one of the oldest music conservatories in the States. Not the house I would have thought I wanted. It's brick, kind of in an Italianate style. And when I walked in, it felt, if you've investigated haunted spaces as long as I have, like, there's a feel to a space. Just walking in, there's a change in the atmosphere. And this space definitely had that. It was heavy, a little cloying. Things had happened there that had soaked into the walls, and they were, the most recent ones didn't seem like they had been very pleasant. This is a house where people loved that house. They spent their lives in that house. They invested themselves in the house, and some of those people have no desire to leave it yet.
All right.
So it's a cozy haunting. Ran classes out of it, but of course I'm an introvert. I'm really reclusive. I'm in my 50s now, and there's just a point where I get overwhelmed with like, I don't want to do classes like every week. Like, that's just quickly became not a thing for me. But my wife has done Airbnb before, so her pitch was, we'll do your classes, and then the rest of the time I'll list it as Airbnb, because it's a college town and people will come through and stay. That makes perfect sense. We did not initially list it as a haunted house because we were just letting it be an Airbnb for everybody. That was our first mistake.
Listing it as a haunted house made a lot of other people come just to
Well,
investigate it now, I'm
well,
sure?
it was more that people really needed to be warned, because
Oh,
although it is what I would describe a cozy haunting, it is a very physically active haunting.
right.
You will hear stuff. What convinced us to finally say, all right, if you believe in it or not, this house is haunted, or at least this is our opinion. We had a person stay there. It was in, I believe, September, and this was several years back, like 2018 maybe. She was there for the college and a music thing. So she's there for like a week or so. She's in this house by herself. She's rented the whole thing. And she opens the windows because it's a nice balmy Ohio day, but that time of year, late September, sometimes the nights get real cold. She fell asleep on the couch in the parlor. And when she woke up, somebody had gone around and closed all the windows and tucked her in with a blanket.
Oh, okay.
So we get this message through Airbnb, like this little private message of like, I don't, because again, she doesn't, it's under my wife's name, so she doesn't even like know to Google me with like haunted ghost shows. So she's like, I don't know if you're gonna believe this, but this is a thing that happened. I think your house is haunted. It's a very nice haunting. And like I felt this very comforting, like motherly female presence. And I'm like, oh, that's the widow. Uh, so no, she was really cool about it. A couple of other people were really cool about it. A couple of people were really not. They had not signed up for it. They were not okay with it. They did not want anything to do with it. And that was just a whole thing. So in the interest of being like full disclosure, we're like, just so you know, there's some weird stuff that might happen.
Looking through your pictures on Airbnb of the house, I noticed that you have what looks like a little room that has a bunch of display cases with books and a dollhouse, and there's dolls, and you've got occult items in there. Can we talk a little bit about that? What is going on in there?
When we first bought the house, they told us this was the doctor's office. My research taught me that the widow was a widow when she moved into the house, and her husband, who had been the doctor, had had his practice in Dayton, never actually practiced medicine in the house. That room is original to the house and was originally meant to be like an office, a home office. It's easily closed off from the rest of the house, which for me, I wanted to have a space to put my memorabilia, my tools, and also to have like little stations of things where people could practice their psychic abilities. So there's a bunch of the haunted dolls are there because they're not all haunted. And part of the exercise is there's a key, like they all have like a number on their foot.
Interesting.
And if you want to engage with them, like you can try to do your own little reading, and then you can flip over the information about them and see what other people have picked up on them.
That is very cool. So, looking at this room, it does look like it has its own separate door. I'm assuming you use this during your class days and
Yeah.
not necessarily during Airbnb days.
For Airbnb, you can request to have it opened.
Okay.
Or to have it shut so that you don't have to deal with the weird stuff that's in there. My mom's haunted violin is in there. The doll's house. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Vera Rubin, who is the person who discovered dark matter. She is getting a quarter as part of women, like pioneering women series with U.S. quarters in the next couple of years. She is my wife's grandmother.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That is the dollhouse that Vera Rubin's father made for Vera and her sister in the 30s. And he worked for General Electric, and he made working lights in the doll's house. It is a family heirloom. The doll's house itself was not haunted, but it can't stay in that house without things starting to move around in it. So if it wasn't haunted before, it's haunted now. Because we've definitely seen somebody rearranges the furniture. Every once in a while, a little dollhouse piece of furniture will show up somewhere it does not belong, and that's just normal in a house like that.
You've given them something to play with.
I have rules for spirits, and they are amicable rules. I have no problem with things cohabiting a space that I also inhabit. That's true in the house that I live in regularly and full time. And as long as everybody respects everybody else's boundaries and nobody is like just basically behave as you would with any other roommate. You don't like crawl in bed with your roommate without their permission. You don't like go touching them and like, screaming at them without their permission and knowledge. So just, share the house. The other things in the display room, I keep a bunch of like backup tools for people who are investigating. So there's like, EMF and a couple of extra digital recorders, a thing that measures decibels and just various stuff, and a very old school recorder to try to do old school EVPs with extra cassette tapes that I keep stocked, and then some of my memorabilia from like Paranormal State and the different shows that I've been on.
So I think it's funny, I was literally about to ask you about a paranormal tool before you mentioned it. Have you been on the, I'm sure you've been on the paranormal side of TikTok recently, right? Have you seen, actually, I don't even know what they're called. This is like the first time I've seen it like a few days ago, where people are going into like cemeteries and they have things that are vocal words. They say vocal words out loud while they're investigating and take those as ghosts or spirits talking to them. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Okay. So I was on Conjuring Kesha and she had one of these. It's called an ovilus.
Okay.
There's a couple of knockoffs of it, but the original one is an ovilus. It is.
How do you spell that? OV.
I think it's OVILUS.
Okay.
I've got opinions.
Yeah. I was curious if you had seen these, and
yeah,
I don't know how to feel about them.
I've got opinions.
I don't know how they work either. So
that's one of my problems with it. So first of all, what it does, it is pre-programmed with a list of words. Mm-hmm. There are just words that are in there. It's black boxed in the sense that like it's not like what those words are, how extensive the vocabulary is, and it's supposed to like trigger when it senses stuff. My understanding is it's like an EMF meter or something in there. So like a K2 or what, you'll get a word in the same time that you might get like a K2 hit or another EMF spike. The problem I have, there's a lot of like knockoff apps of this too. It's just randomized. And
that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, depending on how that algorithm is put together, depending on what words are there. I mean, any tool could feasibly be used, and some argument could be made that it's not any stranger or less reliable than using tarot cards, because you're just shuffling cards and you're pulling a card. It is a limited number of cards, but I don't know. I personally find them a little disruptive, especially if you've got a team where if any one person on your team is kind of a goldfish, where like you might be in the middle of like really, really deep conversation, and then this thing will just pipe up with like top hat.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're like, did the ghost say top hat? I'm like, no, the machine said top hat. And you need to know why the machine, like you need to know more about the machine to understand why that would be relevant, or why that might happen, or if it's just something interacted with it and a random word got spit out. I'm on the fence about the utility of that particular object.
So I just looked this up because there are so many things that are new. Like, I was paranormal investigating for a really long time. I used to work with a podcast company called Planet Paranormal, and I worked with a lot of like older paranormal people where when we were first starting, we were using old crappy security cameras, and we were using like they were just barely making the EMF readers with the lights on them. So we were using old tape recorders and whatever basically we could use. None of this stuff existed. And now that I'm like going through paranormal TikTok, I was like, what is this? Like, what is this thing? I wish I knew a little bit more about how it worked. And I'm looking at these. They are expensive. They're like $600.
Oh yeah, people make a lot of money. There is a cottage industry, and a very, very lucrative one, in making paranormal tools. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Latin phrase caveat emptor, let the buyer beware.
Yeah.
The most important thing about any of these is not that they're going to like open a portal or summon a demon or anything like that. Like the thing that you should be concerned about is, how does it work, and is the science, and I will put science in air quotes, it's based on reliable or something that you personally agree with? Because I've had a lot of people, especially like phone apps are the ones that like really get me, because there's a bunch of phone apps that are out there that are like, here, download this phone app and now you have a ghost box on your phone, and literally it's just something that's programmed to spit out words randomly. And some of it, they will say this is for entertainment purposes only, because there's no guarantee that that's anything other than literally just randomized words spilling out of your phone.
I don't going a little deeper into that. I don't think I would use a phone in any sort of investigation. I just feel like that wouldn't do the job.
There've been a couple of phone apps that I found useful, but they were all being repurposed from something else. The most clever phone app I ever saw was, we were doing table tipping in Salem at a Paranormal State event, and there was a fellow, because we weren't sure if it was moving, because like when you're staring at the thing in low lighting, like your eyes are not reliable. Fellow was like, I've got a solution for this, and he had a level on his phone, and the way your phone absolutely can do this, can measure whether or not it's tipping. So he set the level so that we could see, and he used it professionally. He was like a carpenter
tool, though.
So that's a useful thing.
But like trying to gather any sort of like EVP evidence, I would never use a phone. Like, I just feel like that there wouldn't work somehow.
Well, also, I mean, think about how we increasingly create our devices so that they will cancel out
any
noise.
Sort of, yeah.
And we are like making their eyes and their ears much more narrowly specific to this, to hearing my voice and translating it to you, to seeing my face and translating it to you. And that means that we're also cutting out a lot of stuff. And so it's why there's sort of I know that there are some folks who want to get back to like the old, like literal old school, the magnetic tape, cassette tape recorders. When I got EVPs as a young person, they were on those.
Right.
And I've very rarely gotten anything that didn't sound like a digital artifact. Because like those little Panasonic's digital recorders, the reason that they work the way that they work is they record the stuff and then they erase it and they record over it and they erase it and they record over it. And so you've got the potential for what you're hearing is something that you recorded on there 5 iterations ago coming through garbled. There's no full guarantee. And
right.
I know that people get the look like I'm kicking their puppy when I'm like, we need to be skeptical of all of the stuff that we use. And they're like, oh, but you're a psychic. I'm skeptical of you too. And I'm like, so am I. Like, we need to be skeptical of all of it.
I think it's worth it for people to like look a little bit further. Even if you do both at the same time. Bring your little Panasonic and bring your other just to verify, just to see if there is a difference in audio at the time. Like, you have to. What's interesting about the paranormal is that there's always things changing, and there's always new inventions, and there's always new technology, but like, we have to consider that not all new technology is good technology in the case of gathering evidence.
My thing with the tech is, if you can't look under the hood and know why it works or how it's supposed to work, then you should really question what you're getting out of it. Like an EMF meter. Well, first of all, this is a personal. Originally, you took an EMF meter to a haunted location or an allegedly haunted location in order to rule out false positives.
Right.
In order to find places where there was unshielded wiring, where we know for a fact that if there is high EMF, it has an effect on people in a way that we may misinterpret as a haunting. It can make us feel weird and have this sort of like strange oppressive feeling. Some people will get tinnitus and buzzing in their ears. There's a number of ways that we physically and psychologically react to this thing that we are feeling, but we are not conscious that we're feeling. So we would, and there was at least one haunting for Paranormal State where a significant portion of it was debunked because the couple's bed was like right underneath this like super unshielded thing. Like they were just having their little brains fried whenever they slept in this bed.
Those poor people.
Right? The other thing is super low frequencies. Like you need to like, are there super low frequencies in this building? Because those also have like measurable impacts, and it's not paranormal at all. It feels paranormal because we can't hear those sounds with our ears. We feel them in our body. So originally that's what an EMF detector was for. And then the additional thing was once you've gone through and ruled out all of the things, you know where the hot spots are.
And you got your baseline.
Yeah, you have your baseline. If that thing then suddenly gets random spikes out of nowhere, that is anomalous. Something also is causing that. But does it mean that a ghost is literally like, you know, just walking through the house and is reliably on the EMF spectrum? Probably not. I blame Egon Spengler. Everybody and their kid sister wanted to have a PKE meter. And the EMF meters were the earliest and easiest things to kind of rig up to be like that.
I think it is worthwhile for anybody that going into the very basics of this, because I do like to introduce a lot of people that are listening to my show are listening to different aspects of the paranormal, the metaphysical, the weird, the alternative for the first time. So I'm introducing a lot of these things to people for the first time. And I think the takeaway here is if you are interested in getting into the paranormal in any sort of way, do a lot of research on what people consider works, experiment with new stuff, but always take your baseline and go from there. And I feel that's kind of like the basics of investigation, where make sure there's no exposed wire, make sure that there's no drafts, make sure there's no dust. Well, I mean, there's always going to be dust and orbs, and that's always going to be a conversation with people. But at the end of the day, make sure you have a good baseline and then go and figure out what works for you and what you think is working, and experiment with different types of technologies in order to kind of rule out anything that's physical and real versus what's metaphysical.
Well, and if anybody hands you a machine and says, here, this detects ghosts,
you should always question
ask a few questions. One of which, how? Why does it work? How does it work? Are there ways in which it gets false positives? Like, you need to, I want to be clear. I have had extraordinary experiences. I fully believe, like, I don't commit to any belief 100%, but like 99.9%, I believe there are phenomena out there. There are things that are more than our physical bodies. Call them spirits, ghosts, whatever. Like, there is stuff that happens. I have had experiences that were extraordinary. Not all of them could ever be captured on camera. I think some of them definitely, like, I believe is what I'm saying. And just because I believe doesn't mean I have to believe that everything works just because somebody said it does. And anybody getting into this should simultaneously have an open mind, but a critical mind. That's the old school Greek idea of a skeptic. You want to experience it for yourself. You want to judge it for yourself. You want to like get into the nitty gritty of any tool, whether it's a physical tool or the psychic abilities of a person. understand as much as you can about how do we think this works? How do we expect this to work? Under what circumstances can this be wrong? Can it get a false positive? Everything will get false positives. All of us do. If you can't look under the hood with a tool and learn a little bit about why it's supposed to be working, you should have a very healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to whatever results it's giving you.
Right. Well, I'm glad I know that the ovilus is a thing now, because I'm gonna go do a little bit of research. I'm just curious. I didn't know what it was called. There's a lot of new tech that I'm like, what is this? You have been in paranormal for a very, very, very long time, and you've obviously seen it evolve and change. You've also been involved with paranormal television shows. Most recently, you were with Travel the Dead and the Jack Osbourne show.
Jack Osbourne's Night of Terror.
Night of Terror. How is that going? How are you enjoying that? How do you? I guess my question is, how well? Let me rephrase this. I'm trying to kind of generalize this. You're on a lot of paranormal shows. How do they all, I guess, differ, and do they all feel like really solid investigations? Or you know what I mean? Hopefully you get kind of what I'm saying.
Oh, I mean, paranormal reality TV is a double-edged sword, because it makes it more accessible and more acceptable, and it gets people thinking about the questions that it raises.
But it also
and
has
also
to be
it's
entertaining.
It's still television.
Yeah.
So you always need to approach what ends up on your TV with a grain of salt, because my main takeaway with paranormal reality TV, because I've done stuff from Paranormal State, Paranormal State, Paranormal Lockdown, Monsters and Mysteries in America, American Monsters. I'm going to leave things out, a lot of stuff. 9 out of 10 times, the team 100% is in it, believes in what they're doing, and is not trying to like sensationalize or fake stuff. Like, they're just there to have an experience. I only work on shows where that's the case, or if I find out that it's not, I make a point of the way my contract works. I'm a contractor. I've only ever been a full cast member with Paranormal State, because I reserve the right to just walk.
Right.
If I don't like the way things are being handled.
That's how it should be, especially if you're contracted with a show full time. Yeah, I think that's important that you have control over your own, especially if you're like a cast member on a reality show and you're serious about it. I feel like you should have a say in what is over the top ridiculous and what is something that you're like, okay, this is as legitimate as we can be in this situation.
Yeah, the hard part is usually the contracts don't always allow for that, and that's so there are a couple of moving parts with how that happens. I want to be clear that all the teams that I've worked with are genuine people who believe in what they're doing. I don't always agree with their interpretations. I've worked with Lorraine Warren, for example, and she and I diverge radically on some of our ideas of how things work. But I will say that, having had the opportunity to sit down and talk with her, no matter my opinions of how she applies them, she truly does believe in, or did, since she's passed, like Lorraine Warren. Lorraine Warren is one of those who, she's very controversial, and working with her, I don't agree with a lot of the places she'd take her abilities, but she still believed in what she was experiencing. So that's the first thing to get out of the way. The second thing is, then we get into post-production, and
that's a whole new, because they will take whatever they want and kind of run with it.
It's important for people to understand that Paranormal State was, oh man, naively I believed that if a production company was doing a show on paranormal investigation, someone in that production company was really into it and believed in it. And that does not have to be the case, and most of the times it's not. And even if somebody on the production company is like really into it, it still has to go up through like the network and to the network execs. And as we've seen unfold in like recent months, network execs don't seem to know really anything about what their audience is actually like.
Right.
Like they make decisions based purely on, can I have a fifth yacht?
Yes.
So
the amount
with that in
yeah, the amount of pilots that I have shot in my lifetime that I saw the final, I was like, wow, I look like a jackass. It's terrible. Thankfully, most of them did not go through, and most of them have not seen the light of day. But at the end of the day, they're out to make you look as crazy as possible for good TV.
Yeah, and that's the thing to keep in mind is no matter how genuine the team might be, the medium through which we have to tell our tales is always going to be sensationalized a little bit. So like Jack Osborne's Portals to Hell. I signed up on that show and it was originally just called Portals. And I'm pretty sure the people who knew me, because a couple of them had like some connections to the Paranormal State Days, they knew that if they'd called it Portals to Hell and I said no, just no. I don't want to go into like demons everywhere or get people the idea that like you're gonna like open a tarot deck and have a stairway to Satan. It just doesn't work that way. But it is more sensational. It's a catchier title for the people who... We need to remember that we think of it as paranormal investigation, but paranormal reality TV is a subgenre of horror.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but yes.
And so most of the paranormal execs and the people who are putting these shows together are looking at them from the perspective of how do I make a horror show? How do I make a horror movie? What is it like to have this team of people in this haunted house where anything might happen and they will be possessed or attacked or and jump scares? Like all of those things are applied. So if you look at it through that lens, no matter what we're doing for real, if it isn't exciting enough, that's a show that's going to get canceled.
Right.
It's also why, like, Inspiration House, you're probably never going to see a team on a show like Investigate Inspiration House because it's not a scary haunting.
No.
It's a very active haunting, but consistently people are like, oh, you've got a haunted Airbnb. You know, did an axe murderer happen there? Did this happen there? And I'm like, nope, it's just a bunch of people who still live there.
In at night and close your windows when it's time to go to bed.
Kind of like living with a ghostly bridge club, honestly.
That's cute.
They're sweet.
Yeah.
And completely not the direction that people want the spooky stuff to be.
Coming off of all of that and your experiences with all of that, I've gently, I guess, kind of mentioned New Blood before on a previous podcast. Can we talk a little bit about New Blood? It's releasing in February. I see that you've got like some preliminary podcasts. You have a really successful Kickstarter. How is that show going to differ from reality? Because it's more of a docu-series than it is a reality TV show from what I can get here. And then what are your plans with that? Like what's the intention behind that, I guess? Well,
I mean, the first thing, you know, I lobby all these criticisms on reality TV, paranormal reality TV, and I want to be very clear that the reason I still do it is there are moments where we can convey real experiences, where we can educate, where we can normalize some of these experiences, and that is worth it to me.
Right.
For all of the other stuff and like learning to navigate stuff so that you are presented as well as possible. But unless it's indie, you still have to deal with execs and the networks and like things that are always going to be on things that are always going to be beyond your control in terms of how you're finally represented or what gets cut out. One key thing, I have been, to my knowledge, the only openly intersex person in U.S. television broadly, certainly U.S. reality TV specifically, since Paranormal State. Right. I don't know of anybody else who is open about that, but you would never know that because it never gets discussed. Like any of that stuff is just off camera. My pagan practices almost always like the real nitty gritty off camera because on the idea that people just won't understand, like it takes too much to explain. You know, there's lots of excuses for it. It doesn't have appeal.
But doesn't that mean that bottom line isn't if that's its own thing and they're just like, well, people won't understand, doesn't that mean that there's room for it? There's a market for it? Because if people aren't understanding it, I feel like we can better explain it in a different situation.
Well, in the same way that Katrina and Taddy did Travel the Dead, and just it's their own thing. It is indie, it is self-produced. It means that you, the audience, get to see all the stuff that gets cut out normally.
Right.
In addition, like how investigations aren't always perfect and aren't always simple or neatly concluded. So with New Blood, what we set out to do, and there's the two shows. There's one that's a little bit more traditionally go to locations, do an investigation.
Right.
I am less directly involved in that. I'm usually doing remote viewing for those when I'm involved at all. New Blood itself was really an experimental documentary into the experience itself. What are our beliefs? How do those beliefs shape our experiences? What do they lead us to do when we engage with these haunted locations and with spirits? What does that mean on a broader what does that mean on a broader philosophical field for us? So our original pitch was literally, okay, I've got Inspiration House. We can just sleep over there, hang out, have conversations, and see what happens.
That's cool.
Those conversations personally are why I come back to all of these teams again and again. Is the audience almost never gets to see them, but like those moments where you're processing your experience, where you're kicking around the theories for why things work the way they do, and discussing like, this is like my completely subjective personal way of doing this. What's yours? That's New Blood.
Some of the best, what I feel could have been content, was me doing that, being in a house. Like, I remember a bunch of investigations. There's one in particular in Tombstone, Arizona that I did with a group of friends, our paranormal group back in the day. And we all got we rented a house together, did a bunch of investigations all over Tombstone. It was a really great time. The best parts of that, and I felt like the most evidence gathered, was at the house, because the house was haunted, and was us just kicking around ideas.
Yeah.
And now that you've mentioned that, I don't think I've ever seen that in a show.
It's too boring.
Like a round table.
No, and just because anybody who's done investigations, there's so much that happens when the cameras aren't rolling anymore, when you're not actively investigating and you've just kicked back and you're maybe being silly. They don't ever like to show being silly on a ghost show. Again, it's horror.
Right.
So the fact that, like, God, I remember getting yelled at Paranormal State because I have some idiosyncratic responses to really extraordinary experiences. So I got dunked underwater in a swimming pool and held down by an invisible force. And when I broke free and managed to like come up for air, all I could do was laugh because it was just so, like, I could feel something wrap around. Like, it was so completely beyond the realm of possibility and likelihood that this, and I'm like, I'm cackling. It's like bouncing off of the walls of the other houses in this suburban neighborhood in Massachusetts. And I think the final coherent thing I said was, "Yeah, you can tell the kids aren't lying. Something's pulling them underwater in the pool. It's
That's
great."
funny. I'm sure they love
Nobody got to
that.
see Nobody got to see that because who says that in a horror movie?
Right.
I do. So
quick little sidebar here, because I'm super curious. What are some of your favorite horror movies?
Oh, my all-time favorite is the classic Shirley Jackson Haunting of Hill House.
Oh,
The
okay.
black and white.
That's a good one.
Because there's really no gore. It is a perfect, like, psychological horror, like, really digs in. I loved a lot of, like, Nightbreed and Hellraiser and stuff like that, like the classic horror. I grew up watching, God, those schlocky Saturday matinee B movies.
They're my favorite.
They're so fun, like the Hammer horror stuff, and Legend of Dracula and Return of Dracula, Son of Dracula. Currently, probably my favorite producer of horror content is Flanagan.
Okay.
So Midnight Mass is probably my favorite addition to the vampire like genre in ages. It's smart, it's self-aware, it's gorgeous, just beautiful, wonderfully scripted.
I have like
really,
that there are moments in that series that will never leave me, that just I'll be making coffee one day and I'll just be like, yep, just thinking about it. Like, it is so it's so smart for a vampire show.
Flanagan, I like the fact that he does not cater and will not cave to networks, and the channels really do try to get things to be like as widely accessible as possible, which often means removing those moments of reflection. The same way that we're talking about with reality TV is you don't get to have philosophical conversations on camera. They're so worried that people are just going to click to something else.
Right.
And get bored. And I think the people that I want as an audience are the people who, that's what they're there for. They want that conversation. They want to go deep. They don't want to just like walk up to the rabbit hole and be like, oh, wow, there might be rabbits here. They want to go snorkeling down into like the various strata of dark and twisty and viney and come out the other side wherever that might lead.
Right.
And then have a conversation about it.
I agree with that. And I love that. That's one of the reasons why I'm like, this podcast needs to happen. It's the same, that's what I want. And I figure if the people aren't going to stick around for that sort of conversation, my content is not for them.
Yeah, and and there's so much content out there, so like we can be like incredibly niche now. It's so much easier. Certainly it's not going to be ghost adventures,
right?
And that's fine. I'd rather not be. I would rather have deep conversations. And if I have one regret from reality TV days, was there's probably 30 minutes of film somewhere of me sitting on a bed in a residence with Lorraine Warren having a discussion about Ouija boards.
Yep. That's it's
just
gone.
Our two very divergent opinions about finding this Ouija board in this allegedly haunted place.
That would be interesting to see.
But nope.
Yep.
It didn't fit the narrative. So with New Blood, the goal was to throw all of those restrictions out the window. However weird it got, however experimental it got, just follow the woo.
So you finished filming New Blood?
Yeah.
Okay. How many weeks do you expect? Like, what's the release schedule look like?
I am not involved in the editing stuff, so I'm not actually sure.
Okay.
That part I don't want to make any promises about, because I know early on, like we've got a team working on editing stuff. So here is one of the inevitable downsides of doing work in haunted locations with weirdly psychic people.
Right.
Equipment doesn't always work as intended or expected. And sometimes things just break in ways that seem like it's part of the process.
Right.
That whatever's going on. So I know that the last I'd heard, they were trying to recover. There was like a whole day
Oh
of one
no.
camera that just got eaten. I remember being there, like on location. We were at Inspiration House one of the days where, like, randomly all of the dates reset on everything to a date that didn't exist. That we had some very strange tech issues.
Yeah, it's really weird.
And I am not the tech person for very good reasons. Like, I understand how the stuff works. If it is around me and there is a way that it will not work right, that will happen. As we saw,
Right.
trying to call through here. Like, it's just par for the course. So instant chaos, just add me. And then there's 3 or 4 other people where that's also true. And I feel like this was confirmation bias and magical thinking, but like I've had the pleasure of sitting with Lloyd Auerbach, who's got a degree in parapsychology, who teaches at the Rhine Institute. And it's a known factor with like highly psychic people. Tech doesn't always work around them.
Right.
So with that in mind, I know that that's probably like one of the things where I think that there might be some snags, because I know we were aiming for December. And then there's whole things where we're like, what happened to B camera here? What's even going on? Why is it just, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But then making that part of the story also, because that is a part of the story. Like the computer failure, the equipment
I feel like
idiosyncrasies.
Go back, and even if you record where you're currently at and go, hey, we lost this, we're being completely transparent, I feel like people would be like, oh, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have that freedom with this sort of format.
Well, nobody's telling us how we have to do it.
Right.
So we could just have conversations and do weird stuff and come up with harebrained ideas of like, what if we try this? So we threw like all the spaghetti at the wall just to see what would happen.
So when you initially got this together, how did you pick your team?
They reached out to me.
Okay.
So this was Fen had read the Vampire Codex, and Fen did all the team picking. It was folks that they'd worked with before. In a couple of occasions, like we needed a few extra, like a sound guy, and some of the stuff for that was a fairly long like contract that explained, here are topics that we're going to delve into, and also almost every person involved in this project is some flavor of queer, so if that is not something you're comfortable with, this is not the project for you.
Right.
And just we got some pretty neat folks. Everybody seemed to gel. One of the ideas for just having folks show up at Inspiration House to see where it led was to see, like, do we even have chemistry? Like is there a conversation that's worth having here?
Right. So I'm looking at the site, and what is New Blood Universe? Is that just your umbrella for New Blood?
Yeah, partly it was just like branding stuff. So because there were 2 shows that were being made simultaneously, one where folks all came out to Inspiration House and were kind of following a thread of experience related to my personal practice.
Okay.
And then there was the one that was more traditionally like, and there are other things going on. So investigating this farm and a couple of other places in Kentucky. So people were getting confused of like, you know, which is which. So we're like, okay, New Blood Universe is the whole ball of wax, and here's these 2 things that are coming out.
Got it. With all of this in mind, And going kind of segueing a little bit back to your roots, are you still actively participating in like the greater vampire community, or are we just kind of like just kind of more solitary now in a way?
So I had stepped back for a while just because, like, after a while the politics get to you.
I did the same thing.
And here's the thing: is I run in the vampire community, the paranormal community, witchcraft, occult, like a lot of different fringe RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is communities tend to be very full of all sorts of stuff. Add people, and they're going to be like social problems and things. And I thought for a little while, naively, that the vampire community was unique in this. And then I found the paranormal community, and oh my god,
It's worse.
so
It's the same
no,
everywhere.
really, it actually, like, it is.
And then the pagan community is actually even worse than,
Yeah,
so you've got a tiers of drama and politics.
And the TTRPG community, the gaming community, like, also bad. Like in terms of, there are amazing people and amazing connections to make, and then there are some big personalities and some problem personalities, and they are real loud, and the controversies that happen around them can just traumatize everyone within their sphere. And there's times where you just need to be like, I am taking a break. This is my happy place. I'm over here now. You can, like, sort that out, or let it, maybe the embers burn out a little bit, because that's a lot of fire. I've gotten back in recently, and largely due to a young fellow by the name, he goes by the Vampire Jack Townsend, or just Jack Townsend. He's a TikTok influencer.
I've seen him a few times. I haven't talked to him as of yet. I was actually gonna invite him to be on the show at some point, but he sort of kind of interests me in that he's super interesting with his storytelling, but also he's in the community. So
I like that. So, we started out where, like, you had to try to, like, kind of silo your interests. Like, if you were also writing vampire fiction, like, but that's the fiction, this is my real stuff, and the role playing, but this is my real stuff. And some people would dress up, but, like, Jack is just like the whole ball of wax. This is all of me. Like, I am a big flamboyant personality. I am leaning all in on the fact that, yes, I am a hot vampire daddy. And no excuses.
Yeah.
None. And
that literally goes back to everything that we just discussed in the very beginning. He's like, I don't care, I'm gonna do it all.
Yeah, no, just all in. And
I love it.
There's a glorious freedom with that. And I know that there would be a tendency, especially like 20 years ago, to be like, oh, this is just a superficial, this is an act, this is someone who's just playing dress up. They've just lost themselves in their vampire character. And as someone who lived through that back then, mostly those were people who found themselves. The number of people who discovered, like, who they really were when they gave themselves the freedom to tell a story, to role play a character, to, like, try on something that was outside of what they'd been told they were allowed to be or obligated to be. Again, there's a power, there's a magic in that, in telling stories and making them the stories that we want to see in the world. And that's Jack's whole thing, is, if your world disappoints you, make a better one.
I kind of love that. It was when I first saw him and his wife,
not married
girlfriend
quite yet, but
girlfriend.
Yes, yeah.
When I first saw them, she was just coming out as like, hey, he's a vampire and I'm his, donor situation. And I thought that was really interesting for TikTok, because I hadn't seen it on there before, and I was like, let's see where this goes. And so I've been following them, and it has blossomed in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. I was expecting people to just rip them apart, and I was like, as much as I don't want that, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm glad that people are really accepting of like, hey, this is a lifestyle. Like we've seen, going back to reality TV, we've seen, this is my court and this is my kingdom and these are all my girlfriends and this is what I've got and blah, 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 you know, but I've never seen it in the TikTok format and in such a way that it's consistent almost every single day. They're live streaming like every day.
Oh yeah, no, they are in it.
It's one thing to be like, I live my life as a vampire on real life, true life, real world, whatever television show that is made up at the moment. But to see this actively happening consistently is very cool because it's just never happened before like that.
And having had a chance to like interact with them, they are very genuine people. And yeah, Jack is an idealist in the sense that he's seen the communities, he's watched from the sidelines. You know, he's out in New York and he's closest to the epicenter of some of the most like rife,
right,
at times vicious and toxic parts of what the vampire community has to offer. And he has made it like his personal stated goal to create a space that is safe, healthy, that like will not tolerate toxicity. The fact that he fronts his relationship, that like they make no bones about like how completely head over heels they are about one another. And just, I don't know, there's something incredibly wholesome about the two of them that I don't know that most people would be prepared to apply that word to someone who is also often on his TikTok with fangs and covered in blood.
Right. Right. But as I always tell people who are listening in, some of the nicest people you will meet are the spookiest looking people. Because yes. At the end of the day, a lot of alternative people are, for the most part, minus a lot of the drama, and when you get down to it, the nitty gritty, a lot of them are very kind.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I really want people to see that. Like, I want you to not be scared of that goth in the grocery store, you know, because that goth in the grocery store is probably just trying to figure out how to bake cookies that day, you know, like it's like something that I really, really like expressing here, because a lot of people are just really wholesome. They just really like spooky things, and that is totally okay.
And they've probably been through it, and they chose to keep doing that and being who they are because it was more valuable to be their authentic selves, no matter how you might stare or no matter what might happen. And there's lessons of loss and strength, and also the value of seeing the uniqueness in every being as a precious gift that they can give.
I agree with that. So at the end of the day, I think it's safe to say that things are changing for the better, especially in the vampire community. We had a lot of really craziness go on within the last 15 years is when the craziness sort of peaked. I personally took a step back because I didn't want to be involved with it. Plus I had a career that I was working on and all this, so on and so forth. Coming back into it now, I've removed a lot of toxic individuals from my life because I'm like, I don't have to put up with you anymore. The internet's a great place where I can just block you. And two, it sort of seems like everybody's sort of switched gears because they're getting older now and they're just like, I kind of want to just chill. I don't want to be part of the craziness anymore. Sure, there's craziness. There's always going to be craziness, but like there are new communities cropping up that I've been seeing. Like, did you see Miguel Valentin's Vampire Symposium? I had him on the show. Super cool guy. Just also was in the heart of New York during the peak times. Moved to Florida. Now he's running Florida vampire events, and he just wants to have conversations. Like, that is what we need right now, is like conversations. So people are doing really cool things, and it's really nice to see versus what it used to be, and it was just chaos. And then I guess to make matters worse, all of the Vampire the Masquerade drama was overlapping with the vampire community drama at that time. So
and
that
also
was
club scene
oh,
drama, vampire masquerade drama, kink scene. Like there was so many
all of
places.
it.
Like it all like, and it was a perfect storm of awful. Like, and fringe communities are exceptionally vulnerable to predatory personalities
Yes.
because we all want to see the best in people because we're so used to being judged by people in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
So we will, unfortunately, give people so many passes of like, well, maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe they didn't really mean to be that way. Like, maybe they can be better. Like, maybe we can heal them. And we all, there's a meme that's like, that describes everybody's ex from like way back in the day of like, you know, heater, broken, won't work, maybe you can fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
Broke, won't work, maybe you can fix. A lot of us, unfortunately, like also applied that to our communities where there are people that take advantage of the, oh, you think I'm a victim? Okay, here, help me some more. And just one or two people like that can really create an incredibly toxic environment. We've had culturally more useful conversations with communities in general across different niches, across different subcultures about what toxic behavior looks like,
Right.
about the cost of allowing narcissists to just have free reign in spaces. Like we've had healthier conversations about, hey, boundaries are good. You should hold them.
I love
It is
them.
your right to say no. Guess what? Consent is important. You should, in fact, say no. And that should be respected. And if it's not, that person's a dick.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm glad
we've
really grown in
yeah.
communities. I think it also helps that we also had 2 years of lockdown where we could all just converse about these things.
Well, and also like really those 2 years of lockdown taught, I think, a lot of people what they're just not willing to tolerate and what they had been tolerating and what they really couldn't stand.
Right.
Because you had enforced introspection and yeah, that sea change is 100% tied to like we also had to like think like what's actually important.
Right.
Because here we are sitting at a time where, you know, there were bodies stacked to the rafters in New York. Like they had freaking refrigerator trucks. Like it was, we lived through this incredible traumatizing event. So of course we asked big questions about what do we want to see in our lives? What are we willing to tolerate in our lives? And that level of tolerance probably got a lot smaller for many people, and that's not a bad thing.
No. It definitely thinned out a lot of groups, I think. But I know this is probably a terrible way to phrase this, but I always say that COVID was the best and worst thing to happen to my life. Because it made me look within myself and go, these are things that made me happy. These are things that I want. Why am I wasting my time on these other things? And truth be told, since that time, I have kind of come back into the paranormal, into the metaphysical, because it didn't leave. It was always there. It was just dormant while I figured out what I personally wanted. So now that we have all these people coming back in, it just feels like a completely different space. It's just like evolved space now. And I'm so very thankful for that, just because like it weeded out a lot of the, I guess, negative behavior that was happening before, because people are just like, we don't have to put up with that anymore. We're in a different place in our lives, and you don't offer any value to my life currently, so we can just bye, you know?
Yeah, I've seen people in groups be a lot more proactive about speaking up
Yes.
when something unpleasant, when someone's being out of line, when someone is actually like not following the rules, someone is harming somebody else, like people are just like, either stop it or get out. Like we have all hit my field of fucks is barren.
Right.
And you are just not allowed to ask any more fucks out of me. Please go away.
So let's go back a little bit to the paranormal. Since I'm kind of looking at more New Blood stuff here, what have been some of your top favorite investigations that you've ever done?
Oh, let's see.
Since we're kind of looking back at things.
My favorite stuff has been like the recently, like getting to do remote viewing as opposed to doing the walkthroughs and stuff. I don't mind the walkthroughs. I love being immersed in spaces. And from a personal perspective of developing my abilities, though, working with Katrina on Travel the Dead is really, really fulfilling, because not only am I like, I don't know where we're going, but like, I know what state I've flown to or like what town I've driven to. So like there's certain assumptions I can make about things. Instead, I have zero knowledge of anything, and I'm just sort of like beaming into a place and going off of like whatever I pick up. So my most recent like favorite, certainly in my top 10, is the investigation we did for Travel the Dead with the farm in the undisclosed location. It was the closest to the old residential investigations we would do for Paranormal State, which residential private investigations consistently are my favorite. It's interesting to be able to explore someplace like Eastern State Penitentiary or Trans-Allegheny, and also those are places that have been well trod, and there's so much interference from other people, so many expectations, not to mention, the kind of looming question of like, is it exploitative to do an investigation at an asylum where people had miserable experiences? Like, there is just an untallied legacy of suffering in this place. Are we participating in that by continuing to do investigations there? But the residential investigations, there's a sense of genuinely helping people, answering questions. My work behind the scenes at a number of the Paranormal State investigations, and I'm not naming them only because, again, they're private clients in a lot of cases, was, okay, we've verified that what you say you're experiencing is definitely happening. Here's our idea of what's actually happening in your house. And here's how you live here amicably with what's going on here. Here's how you solve this.
Right.
So the ones that are my favorite are the ones where there's something new to be discovered. There's a way that I can kind of put my own abilities to the test, but also a qualitative way that I have helped someone in some fashion.
I can agree with that. I also like, just to kind of go off of that, I also like residentials because there's no expectations. They have an idea of what might be happening, and once you get down to the bottom of it, sometimes that's correct, sometimes more than often not, and you could give them a little bit more perspective of what they're actually living with. But yeah, I think there's something to be said for helping just people in their homes, because that was one of the first things I ever did, was when I worked with, our group was the Southern California Paranormal Society, and we had a good number of people that were just starting out. We did like classes, like where like, this is how you use the equipment. We were on meetup.com for a really long time. We were bringing a lot of people in to just kind of like get used to using equipment, and then we ended up getting more equipment, and then it just started getting like crazy, and people started calling us to just do houses. So I did that for years, and I feel like some of those house situations were so much more interesting than just doing the Queen Mary all the time. So I think I've found my connection with the dead fairly, I want to say within the last few years, I've been working with a lot of bones, like
Mm-hmm.
animal bones. So I work with fur, animal bones. I ethically source a bunch of things for my store, and I've been making art out. So I'll take an antler and I'll put lampwork beading and
Mm.
chandelier crystals on it. It's kind of something that I've been doing recently. And I feel like every time I make one of these pieces, I am sort of celebrating that animal and just the dead in general. In the those are pieces and parts that are lost physically to something. And I feel like I've gained now a connection with this and I can share this with someone else. And so every piece that I kind of let go of, other people, I hope that other people also appreciate these dead things that I have been appreciating.
I love the whisper of remembered life that lingers in bones.
I do too. And I think that the more I've been working with them, the more I'm like, well, this is really kind of an important connection that I've made here.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I have a little mala I made that I take on investigations, and some people have been like, "Oh, is that your protection from the demons?" And I'm like, "No, this is a focusing tool. It is bone,
mhm.
and it's inspired by something that's used by Tibetan Buddhists. It's not the same thing at all. It just happens to be easiest to find the little skulls carved from ox bone in shops based from some of their original malas. I use it because my particular ability is I read a lot of things fairly indiscriminately, and I can read people. The living are much louder than spirits and the dead and anything that's left. I use that bone in my hand as a way to kind of fine tune and remind myself that when I'm in a location, I'm not reading the investigators around me, which sometimes would happen. I'm aiming for the dead. Like this is my focusing tool to remind myself to find those whispers.
Right. That's so you've given yourself. I feel like that's not something that there's a lot to say here. I feel like
Yeah.
that's something that you have helped tune into and to like separate the fluff from everything else to what you're supposed to be doing. That's really smart. But like that also comes down to when people learn about these things, and even with your codexes and people creating their own journey and their own type of energy work or whatever, we're all different. There's
Yeah.
no there's no like there's no stereo instructions for what we're doing. And I think it's very interesting because sometimes I'll hear stories of people that are like, this works for me. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I've never heard of that before. And it's just something that they started intuitively doing.
Yeah. Well, and really like being open to experiment
Mm-hmm.
and giving yourself permission to. I write books, so I feel like I can say books are not always going to be able to tell you. No book can tell you how you work.
Right.
A book can tell you how that author thinks things work, and you should run screaming from any book that tells you that they have the one way that works for everybody.
Right. I've read so many metaphysical books now in my lifetime that I've picked through them so much to sort of add to my own practices. And I feel that that's really important for people to understand that like your books or any other books, any books in general are just a guideline. They're to kind of help you explore your own life and meaning and the universe in your own particular way. So I think it's
Yeah,
important to sort of tell people that because they feel like some people pick up the book and they're like, this is my Bible. And I'm like, that's cool, but
but no, like the key word there is explore. It's
right.
like you're taking a hike in the back country, and if you're like me, you'll probably pick up a stone here or there or a really interesting leaf, and you'll have memories of the space, but you'll also take other hikes. You'll also go to other places to explore. And that collection, and sometimes you're going to be like, this leaf looked really interesting yesterday, but no, not today. It doesn't work today.
Mm-hmm.
Having that freedom, giving yourself permission to explore without expectation, to change when your situations and experiences change, and to operate in a way that is maybe not expected by other people. If you find that there are hard definitions for the way, like you'll hear about the clairs, like the clairaudience and the clairvoyance and there's this great temptation to put labels to your abilities, to your experiences, to all of this. Labels are only useful when they give us a common language to communicate. They become prisons if we take that label and never allow ourselves the room to grow out of them.
That is wise and substantial. I appreciate that. I really do. I guess I think the same way about labels, but the way in which you just said that simplifies it in such a way that is perfect. Well, is there anything else that you are working on that you would like to talk about?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Lonely House is on an audiobook now. So if you were interested in the role-playing stuff that we talked about, and you want a deep dive into a solo experience that will be narrated by Rain Corbin, that takes you through a twisty haunted house that is a callback to Shirley Jackson and House of Leaves and a lot of like the gothic horror sort of immersive atmospheric stuff, then hie yourself off to Audible and download it. There's a PDF version of it on Dark Heart Games on Itch.io if you want that, or also on my website. But that's been the big thing, working with Katrina and Heather on Travel the Dead, waiting to see the fruits of our labors for New Blood actually get shared with the world.
I'm excited.
That I get real raw. Like I am much more forthcoming about personal practice in that than I've ever been given freedom to do. So we'll see how people look at me afterwards.
I mean, at this point, who cares? Because we don't need that toxicity in our lives.
Also, yes, I am 50 and I don't care anymore. Like, really, it's fine. I've got my cats, I've got my wife, I've got my books. Life is about as happy as it's gonna get.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you and I kind of getting to sort of revisit some old stuff. And I will make sure all of your links and socials are in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for joining us on the Coffin Lounge today. We are on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on anywhere you could listen to a podcast. Please subscribe. You can also watch us on YouTube under Coffin Lounge Podcast. Thank you all so much. I will see you on the next one. Bye.
Fare thee well.